What happens when two of country music's biggest personalities clash on live television? What began as a simple interview soon turned into a fiery confrontation that no one could have predicted. It all unfolded on the Kelly Clarkson Show, where Keith Urban appeared for what was supposed to be a casual chat about his latest album and tour. The mood was light, the audience cheerful, until Kelly asked a question that changed everything. "So, Keith, I have to ask you about something that's been making waves in the industry," Kelly began with her trademark-friendly smile. "There's been a lot of talk about authenticity in country music lately, and I'm curious about your thoughts on artists who some say have strayed too far from the genre's roots." Keith's demeanor shifted instantly. The relaxed smile faded and his fingers began to tap lightly against the armrest. "Well, Kelly," he replied slowly, "that's quite a loaded question, isn't it? What exactly are you getting at here?" Trying to clarify, Kelly continued, "I'm just wondering how you respond to critics who say that some artists, yourself included, have moved too far into pop territory. There was that article last month that questioned whether you're still making country music or if you've crossed over completely." The room's energy changed. The audience, who had been laughing moments earlier, grew silent as Keith leaned back in his chair. When he finally spoke, there was steel in his voice. "You know what, Kelly? I find it interesting that you'd bring up an article like that without even asking me if I wanted to discuss it first. This feels a lot less like an interview and a lot more like an ambush." Kelly looked stunned. "Keith, that's not what I meant at all. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation about how the genre is evolving. You're one of the biggest voices in country music, and I thought you'd want to weigh in." "Address what exactly?" Keith shot back, his tone rising. "That people want to put me in a box? That success means I'm no longer authentic? I've been making music for over 2 decades, Kelly. I've won Grammys, sold millions of albums, and stayed true to who I am every step of the way. So when someone sits across from me on national television and asks me to defend my art based on what some critic wrote, yeah, I've got a problem with that." Kelly tried to keep her composure, though the tension was now thick enough to feel. "Keith, I think you're misunderstanding me," she said gently. "I wasn't questioning your authenticity. I just wanted your thoughts on how country music is changing." Keith gave a humorless laugh. "A discussion, huh? Then let me ask you this. When was the last time someone questioned your authenticity as a pop artist? When was the last time someone implied your success meant you weren't true to your roots? Because I'm guessing that doesn't happen very often." Kelly tried to interject, but Keith pressed on. "And you know what the real issue is here? It's not about authenticity. It's about control. Country music has this obsession with policing its own. We're told to stay in our lane, sound a certain way, look a certain way. God forbid we try to evolve or collaborate outside the box." "Keith, I understand you're frustrated," Kelly said, her tone tightening as she struggled to regain control. "But I wasn't attacking you personally. I was asking about a broader trend. Weren't you, though?" Keith snapped. "Because it sure feels like it." He shook his head, exhaling sharply. "And it's always the same story. The ones who try to innovate, who blend styles, who take risks, they're the ones who get called out. It's never the safe ones." By now, the studio was dead silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate as the tension between the two stars hung in the air. What had begun as a light-hearted daytime interview had turned into one of the most uncomfortable on-air moments in recent memory. A raw, unfiltered clash between two powerful artists, each defending their vision of what country music should be. The studio audience sat frozen, their eyes wide as two of America's most beloved entertainers turned what was supposed to be a light-hearted daytime interview into a live televised standoff. Kelly straightened in her chair, her expression firm and composed, though her voice carried a new edge that matched Keith's intensity. "You know what, Keith? I think you're being unfair here," she said, her tone sharp. "I've had plenty of country artists on this show, and I've never had a conversation go this direction before. Maybe the issue isn't with the questions I'm asking. Maybe the issue is with how you're choosing to interpret them." The words hit Keith like a slap. His jaw tightened and he leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on Kelly. "So now it's my fault?" he said slowly, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Now I'm the problem because I don't appreciate being blindsided on your show with questions designed to make me look like I've sold out? That's rich, Kelly, that's really rich." Kelly's face flushed, though she struggled to keep her composure. "Keith, I think we need to take a step back here," she said carefully. This conversation has gotten completely out of hand, and I don't think either of us intended for it to go this direction. Oh, I think you knew exactly where this was going, Keith snapped, his voice rising. You had that article ready to reference. You had your questions lined up, probably hoping I'd just sit here and give you some rehearsed answer about how country music is evolving. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to play that game. Behind the cameras, members of the production crew exchanged uneasy glances. What had started as an awkward moment was now spiraling into chaos. Kelly took a slow breath, clearly trying to calm the situation. Keith, I genuinely did not bring you here today to ambush you or make you uncomfortable. I've interviewed hundreds of artists over the years, and I always try to ask thoughtful questions that give them space to share their perspective. If I've offended you, that was never my intention. Keith gave a bitter laugh. Your intention doesn't matter, does it? He said harshly. What matters is what you did. You sat me down in front of your cameras and basically asked me to justify my music, based on what some critic wrote. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? Kelly's patience finally began to crack. Her voice when she spoke again was cold and steady. You know what, Keith? I think you're being incredibly unfair and frankly a little paranoid. I asked a simple question about industry trends, and you've turned it into a personal attack. Maybe you need to ask yourself why you're being so defensive about your own music. That last line landed hard. Keith shot up from his chair so fast it nearly tipped over. The audience gasped collectively. Defensive? He barked. You think I'm being defensive? Lady, I've been in this business longer than you've been singing professionally. I don't need to defend my music to anyone, especially not to someone who's never walked a day in country music's shoes. Kelly remained seated, though her posture was rigid, and her voice was tight with restrained anger. Excuse me? Someone who's never walked in country music's shoes. I may not be a country artist, but I know music. Keith, I know authenticity when I see it, and right now, what I'm seeing is someone who's so insecure about their own artistic choices that they can't handle a simple question without falling apart. The studio was deathly silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed louder. Keith's chest rose and fell heavily, his eyes burning with restrained fury. Insecure? He repeated quietly, his tone now razor sharp. You want to talk about insecurity, Kelly? Let's talk about a talk show host who tears down artists just to make herself feel relevant. Let's talk about someone who probably rehearsed that question in front of a mirror, just to make sure it sounded innocent enough when things went south. Kelly stood up now too, the tension between them electric. You are way out of line, Keith Urban, she said firmly. Way out of line. I have never in all my years of doing this show had a guest speak to me this way, and I'm not about to start tolerating it now. And I've never had a host try to humiliate me on live television, Keith fired back. So I guess we're both having new experiences today, aren't we? The air between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Kelly's fists clenched at her sides as she took a step back, visibly trying to collect herself. When she finally spoke again, her tone was chillingly calm. You know what, Keith? I think this interview is over. Maybe you should take some time to cool down and figure out why a simple question about your music sent you into such a tailspin. Because from where I'm standing, your reaction says a lot more about your insecurities than my question ever could. Keith let out a sharp, humorless laugh. My insecurities? That's perfect. Absolutely perfect. You invite me on your show, try to embarrass me with loaded questions, and when I call you out, suddenly it's about my insecurities. You know what, Kelly? You're right. This interview is over. But not because I need to cool down. It's over because I don't have to sit here and listen to this garbage from someone who clearly doesn't respect me or my music. Kelly's composure finally cracked. If you don't feel respected, Keith, maybe you should look at how you're treating the person who invited you here as a guest. She shot back. Maybe you should consider that your behavior right now is completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Unprofessional? Keith repeated, incredulous. You want to talk about unprofessional? How about ambushing a guest with controversial questions they weren't prepared for? How about trying to create drama for ratings? How about pretending you didn't know exactly what you were doing? Kelly shook her head slowly, her voice low but fierce. Keith, I have built my career on treating my guests with respect and having genuine, honest conversations. What's happening right now isn't on me, it's on you. The room remained silent, every camera still rolling as the two stars glared at each other. What had started as a friendly interview had become a full-blown standoff, one that would be replayed, dissected, and debated long after the cameras finally stopped. Kelly took a deep breath, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. I have never, not once, brought someone on this show with the intention of embarrassing them or creating controversy, she said firmly. The fact that you think that's what happened here says everything about your mindset and nothing about mine. Keith let out a sharp, skeptical laugh. Does it, though? He challenged. Because I'm pretty sure your producers are thrilled right now. I'm sure they're already thinking about how to edit this segment to make it as dramatic as possible. This, he gestured between them, is exactly the kind of content you were hoping for when you asked me about that article. The accusation hung in the air like a lit fuse. Kelly's expression flickered from shock to hurt before hardening into controlled fury. You know what, Keith? That is absolutely disgusting. The fact that you'd accuse me and my team of setting you up for ratings is not only wrong, it's insulting to everything I've built here. Do you really think so little of me that you'd believe I'd sabotage a guest just for television drama? Keith crossed his arms, his tone cutting. I think you're a smart businesswoman who knows exactly how this industry works. Controversy sells, Kelly. And you saw an opportunity to create some when you asked a question you knew would push my buttons. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here. Kelly's disbelief turned into open frustration. Push your buttons? Keith, if asking about industry trends sets you off this much, maybe you need to ask yourself why you're so sensitive about your place in country music. Maybe the critics have a point if you can't even discuss it without losing your mind. That last line hit him like gasoline on a fire. Keith took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Don't you dare stand there and validate those critics. Don't you dare suggest that their narrow-minded garbage has any merit whatsoever. You have no idea what it's like to have your authenticity questioned every time you try to grow as an artist. And you have no idea what it's like to be attacked by a guest for doing your job, Kelly shot back, refusing to retreat even as Keith loomed closer. I've had country legends on this show, Dolly Parton, Garth Brooks, Carrie Underwood. You know what they all had in common? They were gracious. They were professional. And they didn't throw tantrums when asked about their music. Keith laughed bitterly. Perfect. Now you're comparing me to other artists. That's exactly the problem with country music. It's always about comparisons. Who's more authentic? Who's more traditional? Who deserves respect? Maybe it's about who handles criticism better, Kelly countered sharply. Maybe it's about who can have a professional conversation without making everything personal. Because right now, Keith, you're proving every single point those critics made about you. The words struck him hard. For a moment, his expression faltered, but then his eyes darkened. What did you just say to me? I said you're proving their point, Kelly repeated evenly, though the tension in the studio was suffocating. You're acting like someone who's lost touch with who they used to be, like someone who's forgotten where they came from. I haven't forgotten anything, Keith growled through clenched teeth. But apparently you've forgotten that this is supposed to be an interview, not a therapy session where you psychoanalyze my career and my motivations. Who gave you the right to sit in judgment of me? I'm not judging your music, Keith, Kelly said firmly. I'm judging your behavior right now, and it's unacceptable. You came onto my show, and when I asked a legitimate question, you turned it into a personal attack on me and my integrity. That's not the behavior of someone secure in their artistic choices. Keith shook his head, his voice laced with frustration. Legitimate question? Let me break this down for you, Kelly. When you invite someone onto your show and immediately bring up negative criticism about their work, that's not legitimate. It's a setup. It's an ambush, and the fact that you can't see that is exactly the problem. The problem, Keith, Kelly shot back, her patience finally snapping, is that you're so wrapped up in your own ego that you can't handle any kind of critical discussion about your music. You think being successful makes you untouchable. Keith's voice rose again, full of defiance. Critical discussion? Is that what you call it when someone questions whether I'm still a country artist? When they suggest commercial success equals selling out? That's not criticism, Kelly. That's gatekeeping disguised as journalism. Kelly threw her hands up in exasperation. And that's exactly why I asked the question. Because this is the conversation country music needs to have. But instead of engaging, you're having a complete breakdown on live television. Keith's eyes flashed with anger. A breakdown? he echoed incredulously. If standing up for myself and my music is a breakdown, then I'll have one every day. I won't sit quietly while people question my authenticity or my loyalty to the genre that made me. Keith, Kelly said, her tone soft but firm. Nobody's asking you to sit quietly. But there's a difference between defending your music and attacking the person asking the question. There's a difference between having passion and losing control. And right now you're crossing that line. Keith ran a hand through his hair, his breath ragged. For a fleeting second, the fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something that almost looked like defeat. The tension in the studio lingered, heavy and electric, as both of them stood frozen. Two strong personalities, each too proud to back down. Keith's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked like he might back down. But then his resolve hardened again. You know what, Kelly? I'm done trying to explain this to you, he said, his voice low but firm. I'm done trying to make you understand why your approach was wrong. You want to sit there and act like you're the victim in this situation? Go ahead. But I'm not going to stand here and let you paint me as some unstable artist who can't handle criticism. Kelly crossed her arms, her tone sharp and unyielding. Then what are you going to do, Keith? Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what you look like right now. You look like someone who came onto my show expecting softball questions and got upset when I tried to have a real conversation. For a long moment, Keith just stared at her. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost eerily so. What I'm going to do, Kelly, he said, is walk away from this disaster of an interview before it gets any worse. I'm going to leave this studio with whatever dignity I have left after being ambushed on national television. You're not being ambushed, Keith, Kelly said coldly. You're being interviewed. There's a difference even if you can't see it right now. Keith let out a bitter laugh. You know what the saddest part about all this is? I actually used to respect you, Kelly. I thought you understood what it meant to be an artist, someone who's trying to stay true to themselves. His words hit like a gut punch, and for a moment Kelly's anger faltered. Her expression softened into something that almost resembled hurt. But when she spoke again, her voice was ice. Well, Keith, I guess the feeling is mutual now, isn't it? Because the Keith Urban I thought I was interviewing today wouldn't have turned a professional conversation into a personal attack. The Keith Urban I respected wouldn't have questioned my integrity just because I asked about his music. Keith shook his head, disappointment flickering in his eyes. You still don't get it, do you? You think this was just about a question, but you didn't ask about my music. You brought up a specific article that questioned my authenticity in front of a live audience without warning. That's not an interview, Kelly. That's putting me on trial. Maybe you needed to be put on trial, Kelly snapped, her composure finally cracking. Maybe someone needed to ask you the hard questions instead of letting you coast by on charm and your accent. Maybe you needed to be challenged instead of coddled with fluff interviews about your latest album. The audience was utterly silent, some uncomfortable, others glued to the unfolding chaos. Keith's voice dropped to a cold whisper. There it is, the real Kelly Clarkson. Not the sweet talk show host who pretends she wants honest conversations, but the one who thinks it's her job to take successful people down a peg. The one who can't stand to see someone else shine. That's not what I think, and you know it, Kelly fired back. But I do think successful artists should be able to handle questions about their work without falling apart on live television. If you're going to put your art out there for the world, you should be able to discuss it like an adult. Keith's temper snapped again. Adults don't ambush each other with loaded questions on live TV, he shot back. Adults don't reference hit pieces about their guests without warning. Adults don't create controversy at someone else's expense. Kelly straightened, meeting his fury head-on. And adults don't throw tantrums when asked to engage with different perspectives. Adults don't accuse their hosts of setting them up just because they don't like the direction a conversation is going. Keith took a step back, and for a moment, it looked like he might finally leave, but then he turned sharply, anger reigniting. You want to know what this is really about, Kelly? It's about the fact that you thought you could use me to create a moment for your show. You thought the country guy would make easy drama. That's absolutely ridiculous, and you know it, Kelly snapped. I have never used a guest to create drama. What happened here happened because you couldn't handle a simple question about industry criticism. Keith laughed harshly. Simple? There was nothing simple about it. You came ready with that article. Your follow-up questions. Probably even your producers whispering in your ear to push harder when I got uncomfortable. Kelly's eyes flashed. You want to drag my producers into this? Fine. Every single person on my team was rooting for you today, Keith. Every one of us wanted this to go well because we respect you. The only person who turned this into a disaster was you. Is that the story you're going to tell yourself? Keith said bitterly. That I'm just some unstable artist who couldn't handle a routine interview? I'm going to tell people the truth, Kelly replied firmly. That I asked you a legitimate question about your music, and you responded by attacking me personally. That you turned a friendly interview into a confrontation. Keith stared at her and something in his demeanor shifted. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something sadder, disappointment. You're right about one thing, he said finally. This conversation is over, but not because I can't handle criticism. It's over because I refuse to take part in whatever this circus has become. He turned to leave, but Kelly called after him. You can walk away if you want to, Keith, but running from hard conversations won't solve anything. It won't make the criticism disappear, and it won't make you look any better than you do right now. Keith stopped and turned one last time, his expression raw. Look better? Kelly, I'm not trying to look better. I'm trying to hold on to a shred of dignity in a situation where you've made that impossible. I came here expecting to talk about music with someone who understood what it means to be an artist. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who thinks my success makes me fair game. For the last time, Kelly said, her voice firm but trembling. You were not ambushed. You were interviewed. There's a difference even if your ego won't let you see it. Keith shook his head slowly, his tone final. My ego? This was never about my ego, Kelly. This was about respect. About treating a guest with basic professional courtesy, and you failed on both counts. With that, he turned and walked off the set. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the echo of his footsteps fading into the distance. Kelly stood frozen for a long moment, her chest rising and falling as she tried to steady herself. Finally, she forced a tight smile and turned toward the camera. Well, she said softly, I guess that's a wrap on today's interview with Keith Urban. We'll be right back after this commercial break. But as the cameras cut and the lights dimmed, it was painfully clear to everyone present that this wasn't just the end of an interview. It was the end of a friendship, a professional relationship, and perhaps even mutual respect that had just gone up in flames before a national audience.